Writing can get messy at times. And I'm not talking about smudged ink or spilled beverages. I'm talking about times where the process gets muddy, where certainty gets less certain, where the clear path forward is anything but clear. Sometimes I paint a picture of the writing process as this efficient, organized, straightforward thing that just involves following steps A through steps B and C and possibly D. But if you spent any time thrashing away at a novel, you'll quickly learn that the writing process isn't always this clean, simple, easy thing. So today, let's talk about some of the times where writing can get messy. These are issues and problems that all writers need to confront lest they mess up your entire process. First messy writing thing that we're going to talk about is revising or editing as you go. There's a very common piece of advice out there that you should finish a draft completely before you go back and start making changes, that you should not edit or revise as you're writing the story. The purpose of this advice is pretty simple. It's to prevent usually beginner writers from getting stuck in an endless loop where you are constantly reworking the first 20% of a novel. If you just keep going back and rewriting or editing or changing stuff earlier in the story and you never make progress towards the end of it, then you're possibly never going to get towards the end of it. It can be really hard to know what works or needs to change in the opening of a novel until you get to the end of that novel, especially if you've never written a full novel. Finishing projects, or at least finishing the draft of a project, is a valuable skill that all writers should work on. Now, despite this advice, some writers do revise as they go. They will go back and edit previous things that they've written before they've finished a draft. They'll jump around to different places in their manuscript. Is this the best thing to do? Should you edit as you go, or should you focus on finishing the story? That's where things get messy. The advice to write forward and focus on getting to the end before you go back and revise is very sound. I think especially if this is the first time you've written a novel, then getting to the end is a good thing to do. In those cases, I would highly recommend that you not edit as you go, that you focus on moving forward until you get to the end of your manuscript. But if you find that jumping around works for you and you are able to make progress on projects by doing this and it makes it easier for you to finish projects, then I guess it's an okay thing to do. I don't see a compelling reason to tell you to stop doing this if it allows you to crank out novels. This is one of the ways that writing advice gets really messy because there isn't one-size-fits-all solution to every problem. Different writers are going to have different processes or even different processes depending on the project that they're working on. At the end of the day, you need to figure out what's working for you. That takes time, experience, making a lot of mistakes, trying stuff that doesn't work out until you settle on something that works. This applies to a lot of things in writing, but especially to this idea of revising as you draft. Next way that writing gets messy is dealing with complexity. Novels are long. It's kind of their defining feature. They have a lot of characters and plot lines. There's lots of setting and expository details. Novels are very long, very complex stories. Keeping all of this information neatly organized, whether in your mind or outside of it, can get very messy, especially for bigger or more complex novels, or if you're writing something like a trilogy or a series. It is totally understandable and probably extremely common for writers to get just overwhelmed and confused and have trouble keeping all of this information straight. There are ways that you can help with this. You can build outlines and character sheets. You can build plot flow charts or take a bunch of notes or build a wiki for all your world building stuff. But even after a certain point, all of the information meant to help you stay organized will just become more stuff for you to get overwhelmed with. I honestly don't have very much to tell you on this point, besides that you should prepare yourself if you're going to embark on something like a novel. Prepare to be overwhelmed by the complexity of your project at some point. I think it's just part of the cost of finishing something like a novel. It's something that all writers need to confront. Next thing that makes writing messy is knowing whether you're improving or just changing. I don't think this is still the case today, but in the first few seasons of The Simpsons, that show had an unusually long, production time for each episode. Because in those days it was still hand animated, like the animation was still hand drawn, an episode would take I think 9 to 12 months between writing and final production. What this meant is that the writers would have a lot more time with any given script than you would typically get on a normal sitcom. And I heard one of them mention in an interview how, because of the long production cycle, they would hear the same joke over and over again to the point that towards the end of production of an episode, they would be inclined to start replacing jokes because they would stop being funny. And in that same interview, that writer expressed a concern that they often had that they would sometimes be replacing jokes, not because they were bad jokes, but because those jokes had become familiar. They were making a change that they thought was an improvement, but was really just a change and might actually have been a worse solution. The same sort of thing happens all the time with folks who write novels. It is hard or even impossible to know if a change you're making actually improves a scene or just makes it different. And this is especially true in situations where you've become very familiar with a scene, or you're in the late stages of a novel where the story is very familiar and you've been over it 1,000 times. Is a new idea good or just novel? Are you actually fixing a problem or just doing work? This is also tricky because feedback in writing is really hard to get. It's really hard to know if you are actually improving as a writer or if you're just doing things differently. Getting feedback usually means consulting the opinion of, at best, a handful of people who themselves bring all kinds of subjectivity and familiarity and biases into the equation. So you can't really rely on editors or beta readers or critique partners to give you an objective assessment of if your writing is improving. And the other more quantifiable ways to tell if your writing is improving, things like book sales or your ability to get publishing deals, these things are such lagging indicators and they depend on so many factors beyond the quality of your writing that they are almost useless ways to determine if you're getting better at writing. Quantifying improvement, whether that's improvement to a specific novel or your own improvement as a writer, is almost impossible to do, and that's something you need to accept. You are always going to be making decisions about what path to take without having clear information about what is the right path to take or what is the right thing to do with a scene that's not working. You may never really know if you're improving or just changing stuff around. The answer to the question of, am I getting better as a writer, is usually quite messy. And the last thing that makes writing novels messy is knowing when the damn thing is finished. There's that old saying, great art is never finished, it's only abandoned. Getting a novel finished is not the same as reaching the end of a draft. There is always going to be more revision you could do, more edits you could make, ever more changes and improvements that you could spend a lifetime laboring over. There's really no way to know if a novel is done. Sure, there's processes that every novel should go through. It should be spell checked and line edited and copy edited, and beta readers should get a crack at it. But even with those processes, there are still novels that get published with plot holes or spelling mistakes or prose passages that could be further massaged. If you care about your work and you're deeply invested in making a novel as good as you can possibly make it, then you will probably always find ways that it can be improved. But it will never be perfect, and at some point you just need to make a decision to walk away or you never will. There's a judgment that has to be made about whether further changes to a novel are worth making. Ultimately, there's no clear answer to when a novel is truly finished. Yes, you can do a lot of polishing. Yes, there can be obvious problems in the novel that would indicate that it is definitely not finished. But deciding that something is finished is not about reaching a certain level of perfection. It's really about a decision that the writer makes, and no one can make that decision except you. Speaking of decisions being chosen to make, I have made the decision to end this video right here because we're at the end of it. I apologize, the conclusion is a little bit messy because, as usual, I didn't really write one. So there you have it. I would love to hear about some of the ways that your writing gets messy in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.